2,000 years ago, the city of Rome had a population of over 1 million people. It was the capital of an empire that covered 2.3 million square miles, and its power seemed limitless. But just 4 centuries later, less than 15,000 people remained in the city. Its great monuments were reduced to rubble, and its once bustling forum became overgrown pastures for pigs and cattle. But there were some structures that survived untouched, underground. In the 6th century BC, Rome was a growing city. And like any growing city, it had a big problem getting rid of its waste. The solution? An innovative sewer system that would funnel wastewater out of the city and into the Tiber River. Now, it's not the most pleasant artifact in Rome, but if I want to see how this city got its start, I've got to get down there. It all begins in the Imperial Forum, in the heart of both modern and ancient Rome. Somewhere beneath the Forum lies the Cloaca Maxima, or Great Drain. It's one of the world's oldest sewers, and without it, the world's greatest capital city could have ended up a sewage-filled, second-rate town. Hey, Paul, thanks for meeting with me.
Hey, Eric, nice to meet you.
Paul Bennett, a leading expert on subterranean Rome, agreed to take me down there. So where is this sewer?
Okay, well, the sewer runs right here through the heart of the Forum. It goes right through this area, runs all the way underneath the Forum, and then empties into the river.
Thousands of people pass through the Great Roman Forum every day. They have no idea that the roots of Rome run beneath it. But why did the Romans choose to found their city in this spot? How did a group of farmers transform a marshy valley into the world's first megacity? The answer is underground, almost 20 feet beneath today's street level.
The Cloaca, despite its importance, is the great hidden secret of Rome. It runs silently underneath the city street. The Cloaca, although it's supposed to be just filled with effluent from the streets, actually has quite a bit of raw sewage flowing through it. So you don't want to touch any of the water. There are rats, there's plenty of garbage, there's lots to trip over. You're walking up a slippery marble surface that's been covered with sludge for 2,000 years. There's quite a bit of danger.
Normally, no one is allowed down into the Cloaca, or Great Drain, but I had special access.
Okay, so we're gonna need to wear waders and a mask and some rubber gloves and a helmet. Gotta take off my boots, get ready to get dirty.
To this day, runoff from the hills and streets of Rome still drains into the ancient sewer. You can guess what's down there. It's overflowing with disease, bacteria, and worst of all, rats. All right, take me to your sewer.
Okay, you may want to put on your gas mask because it's a little stinky down there.
You clear, Paul?
Yep.
All right, I'm stepping down a few thousand years. Oh, it smells delightful down here. It's like a soup. Woo! This is one stinky smelling sewer. Holy, this is amazing. This looks like a modern facility. I mean, really, it's massive. And I can hear some water flowing over there. It's calling me. Should we go over there?
Definitely, let's go.
What am I stepping in that I'm sinking into right now?
Oh, you're stepping in a wonderful melange of urine and dirt and paper and beer bottles and pretty much everything that falls on the ground in Rome eventually makes its way into the Cloaca. Today and 2,000 years ago.
Delicious. Woo! This looks like a bone, huh?
Yeah, big bone. And look, you know, pieces of pottery. This is an ancient beer bottle and a modern beer bottle.
The Cloaca Maxima has been collecting Rome's trash and waste for over 2,500 years. Buried 20 feet beneath the modern city, it's one of Rome's oldest standing structures. But who was responsible for such a revolutionary idea? It was the 5th king of Rome, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. Around 600 BC, the tribes living in the surrounding hills began to merge into one city. Their first major construction project was to build a sewer that would drain the marshes between the hills and carry away its waste. To do this, they dug a parallel channel that sloped at a perfectly steady grade from the hills into the Tiber, an impressive feat without the help of modern machinery. Large stones were fitted together to channel the stream, and finally, the water was released through the channel, creating the Cloaca Maxima. This is only about 3 feet high now. What is this?
Yeah, everything changes here. This is part of the original Cloaca Maxima, going back to the 6th century. This is the mother lode, the beginning of Rome, arguably one of the most important spaces in all of ancient Rome.
And you can still see the form. Here's the arch right here.
This is the Roman arch for you, in a nutshell. So it's so strong on the sides that they can build right on top of it.
The famous Roman arch began to show its usefulness in the sewers, beneath a quickly rising Rome. Along with the cloaca, this engineering feat, more than any other Roman invention, contributed to the rise of this city. In the beginning, the cloaca was simply an open ditch. But as the city grew, Romans needed more building space. So they began to cover the ditch and build on top. To reinforce the buildings above, they added the arch to the sewer below. And in the 1st century, when Rome became the richest empire in the world, they added yet another touch to the cloaca. It was nothing but the best for Rome, even in its sewers.
Okay, so now I'm walking on something and it's a smoother surface. What is this here?
This is the travertine area where the emperor decided, even though this is a sewer, he would use travertine to pave the floor of it. So we're walking on a kind of limestone marble surface here.
So this was the fancy part of the sewer, huh?
That's right.
The emperor's plan worked. 2,000 years later, here I was, down in the sewer, admiring the marble floor. As the city grew out from the center and as new, larger buildings were constructed, the sewer changed as well. Since the sewers needed to reach every building, the cloaca became a subterranean network that mirrored the city above. In other words, no matter how much the city has changed today, the sewers are like a street map of ancient Rome. The cloaca spans for at least a mile beneath the city, but much of it is too dangerous to explore.
We're at a juncture of a lot of different lines coming in into the central sewer of Rome. Some of these date to the antique period, some of them are modern. There was a great need to get water out of the city and to the sea. We have to stop here. We can't go any further because the floor drops out.
It drops out and there is a large layer of scum right there and all these waterfalls you gotta dodge.
It's hard to believe that one of the wonders of ancient Rome is a drain full of ancient sewage. But this dirty, off-limits pipe was step one towards creating one of the most powerful cities in the world. While today's Romans are used to walking past Caesar's tomb or Nero's favorite stomping grounds up above, few know none of this would be here today if not for the engineering marvel buried beneath their feet. Up next,
Come on in.
a Jewish and pagan empire of the dead.
My God, look at that. I mean, you can see all the bones right there.
And later,
This place just keeps snaking around, doesn't it? I mean, it's like we're in an underworld city.
signs of ancient life in a subterranean neighborhood.
These are the actual emperors that were found here in this space?
In ancient Rome, it was a sign of leadership to be born with a crooked nose.
By the 1st century AD, Rome already had a complex sewage system. Over 250 miles of aqueducts, even apartment buildings. Life inside these city walls was bustling. But just beyond the walls was a city of the dead. Ancient Rome was surrounded by 6 miles of nearly impenetrable city walls that stood more than 30 feet high. But it was another, invisible wall that separated the living from the dead. It was called the Pomerium, and it was the religious boundary of the city. Roman law stated that the dead could not be buried inside the sacred area. But with over 1 million people living in a city that suffered plagues, fires, and civil wars, death was an everyday part of life. Burying a lot of people in a short amount of time was a real problem. In the early days of the city, most Romans were pagan and simply cremated their dead. For the more wealthy residents, they built elaborate mausoleums to house the remains. But as the empire expanded, there was a growing community of Jewish and Christian citizens who didn't believe in cremation. Their solution? Catacombs, large subterranean superstructures that snake for several miles underground. Over 500,000 people were buried in them, creating an enormous necropolis just outside the ancient city walls. Many of the mysteries about everyday Roman life have been uncovered by exploring the underground labyrinths, and I was heading down to find them. I met Greg DePippo, an expert on religions in ancient Rome, along the Via Appia.
Greg, thanks for meeting with me.
How you doing?
Catacombs can be found below many of the streets, parks, and even private homes just outside the city walls. There are 77 known catacombs buried just outside ancient Rome, but 6 of them are unlike any other. They were left behind, not by the Christians, but by Roman Jews. Rome is the oldest diaspora community in Western Europe. But after an earthquake in the 11th century, 1,000 years of Jewish presence there was diminished. But some of that still remains underground.
Come on in.
And I had special access to go beneath the yard of a private home to see it.
Watch your head.
All right.
You're definitely going to need one of these. And you're going to want to watch your step.
So, Greg, am I in the 2nd century right now? Is this ancient Rome?
This is ancient Rome. This is ancient Rome.
This looks like natural roof in here.
Yes, this is a cave. Italy is mostly volcanic material called tufa.
Rome sits on layers of this compressed volcanic material, or tufa. Tufa is soft and easy to dig, making this city of the dead fairly easy to carve out by hand.
And as tufa is exposed to air, it becomes harder. So it does become strong enough that you can just sort of leave the gallery without a worry about a collapse.
I see. So that's why this doesn't come down.
Right.
They had to dig fast to accommodate the bodies, so the layout is haphazard. The catacomb was only discovered in 1859 and hasn't been entirely excavated. But what has been cleared out is almost 2 miles long and holds nearly 7,000 bodies.
Now this is incredible.
These are the original burial sites. This is what is called a loculus, which means a little place in Latin. They're carved into the walls, and the stones here, you see, this is in Greek.
Inscriptions on the stones tell us who's found in each burial site. But why isn't it in Hebrew? Many believe that the Jews buried here migrated to Rome from Jewish colonies in Egypt, Greece, and modern-day Turkey, and not directly from the Holy Land. So they would have spoken Greek, the language of the common people. But there were other clues down here.
It is not so well carved, and so this indicates that these people were poor. Catacombs are a way of creating lots of burial space quickly and cheaply.
With a high infant mortality rate and an average life expectancy of under 25 years, there was plenty of business for the undertakers in ancient Rome.
Here, all you need really is a pick and wheelbarrow, and you've created your burial space. So when they were getting ready to bury someone in a catacomb, a digger would come in, create a loculus. They would put the body in, wrap it up in a shroud. Very often they would put lime on top of it to hasten decomposition. And then they would seal the loculus with the bricks. And the Jews would put their inscriptions next to the body.
As more people died, they simply dug farther and farther underground. This nearly 2-mile-long catacomb was only used for 200 years, from the 2nd to the 4th centuries. Archaeologists know this by the clues left behind, marks in the hand-carved walls. And they know for sure this was a Jewish site, not a Christian one, by the menorah left behind.
This is clearly what tells you that this is a Jewish catacomb.
Yes, absolutely. And for the Jews in the ancient world, this was their symbol of themselves, the 7-branch menorah. Wherever you go and you find a clear archaeological evidence of a Jewish presence, the menorah is what you see. The Star of David is not the thing. And here you have an arcosolium.
An arcosolium is something the Jews and the Christians had in common. It's a Latin word for the arched burial spaces we saw throughout the catacombs. The Greeks used the term sarcophagus, meaning flesh eater, a word both Jews and Christians may have taken offense to.
The Jews and Christians do not want to give the impression that the body is being definitively consumed by the earth. So when they put people in these things, they call them solium, which is the name of the shape, underneath an arch. So it is an arcosolium.
Throughout the catacomb, there are several burial spaces like this one, but not all were for the poorest of Jewish Romans.
This is the one part of the catacomb where you have clear indication of burial for wealthy people, because you've got a lot of very elaborate painting. It's a fountain. You see the water springing out of it. Water is a very important thing, especially for people who come from a desert originally. And so water is always a sign of paradise. And likewise, these palm trees, these are actually date palms.
Oh, sure. Look at this. You can make it out.
Yes. You have children's graves also stuck in here,
right,
ruining the really nice plaster decoration. What you may be looking at is the result of a plague, where a bunch of members of the same family die from plague. They need to create a space very quickly to get rid of the body, so to speak.
There I was, 15 feet beneath a private home.
It just seems to snake around in different directions.
Where ancient Jewish Romans would have gathered to bury and pay respects to their dead family members. But what was most eerie was that it was like they had never left. That's because for 1,500 years, these rooms were sealed up tightly. That meant the artwork and human bones remained intact.
Those are human bones.
In
These have
centuries.
survived maybe 18th centuries, probably because the grave was originally sealed up very, very tight, and so there was less air and moisture getting in to cause decay.
Several areas revealed eerie bunches of small loculi, or burial spaces.
About half of the people who were born did not live to see 5 years old. So you also are going to have a lot of infant graves. So because I have plague, or just because of a really hot summer, and lots of infants would die.
Oh my God, look at that. I mean, you can see all the bones right there. I wouldn't even know what those curved, I mean, they could be small ribs from a child. I really wouldn't know how to explain that.
It's a child's grave.
It's like some Indiana Jones moment here.
I was walking in one of the few time capsules of Jewish Rome still left intact. It was littered with clues about their lives, but there was much more to see down here.
It seems to snake around in different directions.
As we walked to the deepest part of the catacomb, we ran into another burial space. And this one was carved out by a different group altogether.
This is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, look at this.
The artwork was different here. Mythological paintings in vivid colors. We had run into a pagan burial space. Greg says that at some point during the construction of the catacomb, the builders had actually broken through to an even older pagan burial plot. They connected the two separate catacombs, expanding the ever-growing underground city of the dead.
Well, you were actually in the part that was not made by the Jews originally, probably from the earlier part of the 2nd century AD. It's deliberately created to create a sense of a garden, of the afterlife as a place of enjoyment, as a place of happiness.
Over 1,800 years ago, pagan and Jewish Romans began burying their dead in this catacomb. And as this diverse community grew up above, so did the massive underground cemetery. Today, few realize this world of clues sits just beneath their feet.
I mean, there's major thoroughfares, roads that go right past it. There's a house above our garden. People would have no idea. I mean, there's so many layers of history. It's so rich here.
It is very much so, very much so.
Up next, discovering a lost neighborhood.
This place just keeps snaking around, doesn't it? I mean, it's like we're in an underworld city.
And later, inside an ancient power symbol of Rome.
This is much bigger than I anticipated. You can't see it from the outside. But this snakes around, and I can see there's different chambers.
Prostitutes in ancient Rome charged the equivalent of 8 glasses of red wine for their services.
For over 2,000 years, Rome has been under construction. By constantly building new structures on top of old foundations, the street level has been raised 30 feet above the ancient one. Imagine this entire neighborhood buried beneath the ground. Well, in Rome, that's exactly what you'll find. In the 1st century AD, Rome had a population density higher than modern-day Calcutta. And like many modern-day cities, most of its residents were packed into high-rise apartment buildings called insulae. Like the Circus Maximus or the Colosseum, these buildings were among the secrets to Rome's success. So what happened to the common neighborhoods? Like much of ancient Rome, they're buried beneath the modern city. And Tom Rankin, an expert on ancient architecture, was going to show me how these ancient neighborhoods are actually holding up the neighborhoods of today.
You must be Tom?
Yeah, I'm Eric.
Tom? So I'm told you got an apartment building to show me.
Well, it's more than an apartment building. It's a little bit of everything, but we're going to go into a 4-level building, move back here and see the brickwork there.
Yeah, this little patch.
Yeah, that dates from late ancient Rome. It's what would have been the 4th floor of the building, but it's now the 2nd floor of the building. We'll be entering at modern ground level, but be going down 2 stories to the most ancient level that we have surviving. Go on down. After you.
Thank you.
Tom took me through the entrance and down into the sublevels of the building.
Watch your head there.
Okay.
It's a sprawling complex of ancient warehouses, apartment blocks, and even the streets in between them. It's literally an entire neighborhood lost beneath the streets of modern Rome.
Look at this. I've got a nice Roman arch above me, a barrel vaulted room. This is incredible.
Yeah, and it goes down even further. We'll be going down another level below this. The building we're in was built in a number of phases, dating back to as early as the year 0, when this part of Rome was inhabited under Augustus by warehouses, industrial buildings. It's a nice slice through history where each era is pretty well preserved and visible to us.
The underground neighborhood spans over 400 years of constant building and rebuilding, from the height of Roman power in the 1st century to the empire's fall. But when the empire fell, why didn't these buildings fall with it? There were no bulldozers back then, so each generation just built on top of the next, leaving time capsules, like this one beneath the streets. We began our journey 25 feet underground and 2,000 years in the past, in the oldest part of the subterranean neighborhood.
We're at the ground floor level, so the brick walls back here, those are authentic. And here I'm talking about 1st century AD, the time of the Flavian emperors.
The building we were walking through was built when Rome's first emperor, Augustus, began rebuilding the city after years of turmoil and neglect. As the empire and its capital grew, warehouses like this one were needed to store goods from around the empire. But how was this underground neighborhood still able to support the city up above? The answer is in the concrete. Common concrete is made with sand, but the Romans used volcanic ash, which was much more porous. When ash, lime, and water are mixed together, a chemical reaction occurs. The result is an extremely durable, waterproof concrete that still bonds the bricks of these buildings today. 2,000 years ago, this space would have been filled with dock workers and slaves, hauling imported goods on barges from around the empire. This space is still just a few blocks from the river, but today, it's buried 25 feet below the ground. As we walked up just one flight of stairs, we were moving forward 200 years in time, and into what used to be a courtyard.
Leaving behind the 1st century AD, and coming up to see what changed over time. This was actually an outdoor space around 200 AD, when the rooms below had become basements. Ground level started rising up a little bit because of some of these earthquakes and fires. And we have to imagine something very different from what we see today. This is stuff that was found here, lying around here.
You're kidding. So these are the actual amphores that were found here in this space?
Yes, and like so many other things in Rome, they're unbelievably abundant. I mean, this is what, 1,800 years from now, people are going to be picking up, Twinkies wrappers and looking at them like this.
So you're looking at an ancient Twinkie wrapper.
The pottery left behind reminded us that 1,800 years ago, this was a busy warehouse, with Romans working right where we stood. But 25 feet beneath the street, I found a lot more than ancient wrappers. I found myself standing inside a 1,700-year-old house.
We're getting up into medieval times. So this is a decorative geometric pattern floor of probably a house from late antiquity, meaning 4th century AD or so. We can even see over here plumbing, which lies underneath the floor.
Are you kidding me? Is this ancient plumbing?
This is ancient plumbing. It's modular terracotta tubes.
We had walked out of a warehouse, into a courtyard, and back inside into an apartment building, all within this one underground neighborhood, and all beneath the modern city. Even still, there was more. A small opening in the wall led to another corridor. Even our expert wasn't sure what was beyond the wall.
Oh, let's go.
This place just keeps snaking around, doesn't it? I mean, it's like we're in an underworld city.
Well, we are underneath the city, and this was a city underneath the city. Another series of floors down here. That's a nice piece.
Oh, look at this.
So these are rooms which were residential. They were probably sleeping rooms, and they were well off, middle class. The nice decorative mosaic floors, the decorative frescoes, which might have had some figural paintings in them.
This nearly 3,000 square foot complex is impressive, but it's just a small piece of the puzzle. Look under almost any street in Rome, and you'll find the foundations of an empire.
We would find clues that would help put further together this puzzle and give us a better understanding of what Rome was like in that period.
Like in most big cities, it was the common folk who lived in neighborhoods like this one that made Rome great. Its dock workers, carpenters, and merchants built the foundations for the capital city of one of the world's greatest empires. And today, these ancient buildings are literally the foundations for the modern ones. Up next,
This snakes around, and I can see there's different chambers.
a subterranean symbol of power.
In ancient Rome, you would be disqualified from a wrestling match by gouging out your opponent's eye. Thus the phrase, "It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye."
There's no city in the world with more fountains than Rome. Walk around any street corner and you'll probably see one, from small drinking fountains to amazing works of art. The ability to harness water was key to the survival of ancient Rome. And as you can see, no one did it better. Today, Rome's water fountains pump millions of gallons of fresh water into the city. Trevi Fountain alone pours out 22 million gallons of water each day, all of it still coming from an original Roman aqueduct. Romans had been building elaborate fountains for over 2,000 years. The constant flow of fresh water came to symbolize the health and wealth of the city. Yet with all of the towering aqueducts and elaborate fountains above the ground, most of the ancient city's waterworks are still buried 25 feet beneath the streets.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for meeting with me.
Hi, nice to meet you, Eric. On the other side.
I met with Katie Parla, a guide who specializes in Rome's underworld. She was taking me to what seemed like an ordinary fountain, but this fountain was different. It was a symbol of power in ancient Rome. Today, the ground level has risen over 25 feet, so believe it or not, the fountain is actually buried underneath this modern apartment building.
We have to envision late Republican Rome. Delete the Colosseum and fill this area with the villas of Roman aristocrats, public buildings, offices, commercial spaces, and residential areas.
So the Colosseum is not here.
Right, the fountain was built in 50 BC, which was more than 100 years before the Colosseum was constructed.
In fact, in 50 BC, not only was the Colosseum not there, but much of the hill itself was actually level. After more than 2,000 years of construction and destruction, the hill today is actually the rubble of ancient Rome. But tucked away along the retaining wall is a door that most people would never notice. A door that's not open to the public. That would take us over 2,000 years back in time. We were headed down to an ancient fountain that was unearthed in 1894 during construction of the street above us.
Kind of a narrow stairway here, Katie.
Yep, it's a spiral staircase leading down into the Nymphaeum.
The Nymphaeum was a monumental fountain, built on a private villa or domo around 50 BC. The worship of nymphs, or sea goddesses, was common in Rome, emphasizing the importance of water in the ancient world. 2,000 years ago, this would have been a semicircular fountain adorned with shells. There were several niches with statues inside, and most likely, a pool in front of it. Today, it's a time capsule, preserved beneath the streets.
Right, we're looking at 4 of 9 original niches that formed part of an nymphaeum, or monumental fountain. So we've got to imagine 5 niches continuing in a semicircular shape towards the modern street that we just left. Water would have flowed here, and in order to reinforce the water aspect, the decorations in the niches and on the walls include seashells.
Fountains were more than just decorations in ancient Rome. They were a mark of an advanced society, one that was concerned about hygiene, and one that could harness water. The fountain was a link to Rome's ancient waterworks, one of the key ingredients to the rise of Rome, and I was standing in the middle of it. 2,000 years ago, we would have been underwater.
The fountain would have been fed by a water source that was not necessarily visible. I mean, the whole aspect here of having this nymphaeum is to posit it as a naturally occurring spring that this aristocrat just happened to build a house around. So we're supposed to be tricked into thinking that he's tamed nature in some way, whereas this is absolutely a man-made structure that was supplied by probably lead pipes that fed the water to the site.
Even without modern machinery, early Romans created an elaborate world of plumbing. Here's how it worked. The water's journey began over 40 miles away. It ran through the Aqua Ania Vetus, a winding aqueduct that sat almost entirely underground. Once the water approached the outskirts of the city, it poured into large castella, or cisterns. Today, these cisterns are scattered and buried throughout the modern city, like this one, that still sits in the middle of a business park. It's off limits to the public, but Katie agreed to take me down.
You can feel it getting colder as we walk down.
Yeah, it's a little humid too.
This is much bigger than I anticipated. You can't see it from the outside. But this snake's around, and I can see there's different chambers. I mean, here's a chamber right here, and I can see beyond that one, and around there, and around there. I mean, this is quite a structure.
Not only is it amazing that 2,000 years ago, Romans knew how to get this much water here, once it was here, they also installed an elaborate system of purification. These cisterns, or castella, purified the water and then redistributed the water to smaller holding tanks. But how? The cistern was designed with 2 concentric rings and a center cylinder, where the water entered. From there, the water would flow through the openings in the walls into the next ring.
So the water would enter in one part of the building, it would circulate around the structure, but the separate rooms would cause the water to slow down in its path. So this would allow the particles in suspension to fall away.
As the water moved through the rings, the openings slowed the water down. The dirt and debris in the water would fall to the floor. and the purified water continued through the cistern and out through a channel on the opposite end. Other cisterns throughout the city used this ingenious combination of gravity and circulation to purify the water. But this was no ordinary cistern.
The cistern is about 50 feet in diameter, and the chambers are about 20 feet in height, which makes it unusually large if it was for private or domestic use, implying it was used for agriculture industry.
More than 5 times the size of the standard Roman cistern, it's likely that this was built to water a large industrial farm that helped to feed the citizens of Rome. But how did they prevent the pressure of more than 200,000 gallons of moving water from cracking the outer walls?
So you can see a lot of exposed brick, but then you have this really thick mortar. Right here, there's a huge patch that's missing. Why was the mortar so thick?
Well, this is a traditional thickness for plaster in antiquity, and this particular plaster is a waterproof plaster.
The Romans invented this waterproof plaster. Just one more example of how advanced the Romans were. But that's not all. Besides the waterproof plaster, the walls of this cistern were designed to withstand tremendous force.
This is tufa, which is a local volcanic stone, and these are pyramidal pieces that were embedded in the concrete core. And what we don't see is that above and below the tufa construction are parallel lines of bricks. And when you see these two arrangements beside one another, this is a technique called opus mixtum.
And why would they mix them?
You've got two different types of compressive materials pushing up against one another. They thrive under pressure, they create a stronger building.
The 2 layers of brick work like a vise, pushing the concrete and tufa layers together. The more pressure pushing against the layers, the stronger they become. It's no surprise that in Rome you can go beneath the streets to uncover an ancient water world, a world that made it possible for the empire to become the largest in the world. It may look like just a fountain, but it was much more. Up next, the buried retreat of Rome's emperors.
This is brilliant.
It's cracked up, but stucco itself was painted.
This is really gorgeous. For over 2,000 years, Rome has had a terrible problem with traffic. At one point, Julius Caesar actually banned carriages and wagons in the city. And today, it isn't much better. But banning traffic in a modern-day city isn't realistic. So the solution seems simple. Build new roads. The problem? Everywhere you dig, you run into the remains of the past.
Just like 2,000 years ago, today, Rome is constantly under construction, fixing aqueducts, adding extra sewer lines, and building new roads. The city's new metro line project is still in its first stage of operation, but it's already unearthed dozens of new archaeological finds. So it was no surprise when the construction of a new road in this bustling residential neighborhood unveiled an ancient secret. The intact remains of a 2,000-year-old Roman villa, including an auditorium that was center stage in one of Rome's greatest power plays. Xander Evers, an expert on ancient Rome, agreed to take me underground to show me.
Hey, Sander, thanks for meeting with me.
Good to see you. Welcome.
The ancient building sits almost 20 feet beneath this park in the Piazza Vittorio neighborhood. Today, it's packed with shops, businesses, and modern buildings. But 2,000 years ago, this was the suburbs, the playground of the rich and famous.
Imagine this 2,000 years back, and we're right in the middle of what used to be an enormous complex. Big villa, huge gardens, all very nicely decorated. But sadly, this is the only part left of it.
Can we go in and take a
We
look?
can certainly go in. It's spectacular inside, I can promise you that one.
Great.
Hundreds of locals walk by this inconspicuous brick building every day and have no idea it sits on top of ancient Rome.
This was all buried until the end of the 19th century.
This was all buried.
This was all buried. Okay, so we're walking into an auditorium. This was a big hall where you could listen to poets performing, people sitting on those steps there in the back and listening.
This is gorgeous here.
It's not bad.
The underground structure was just one small part of the sprawling estate. It was built around 30 BC by Gaius Maecenas, an extremely wealthy citizen. Maecenas was close friends with a man who would later become known as Augustus, Rome's first emperor. When Maecenas built the villa, Rome was still a republic. Just a few years later, his friend Octavian was granted the title Augustus and became the sole leader of Rome. Keeping the image of a republic while consolidating control wasn't easy. But with the help of his friend Maecenas, Augustus found a unique weapon in keeping political power.
The big poets of those days come in and write works to entertain, but also to broadcast a political message almost. Why Augustus should have become the emperor, why it was justified for him to have become the emperor after a time where the Republic effectively had come to an end.
Transforming Rome into the capital of an empire took ingenious engineering, like sewers, aqueducts, and high-rise buildings. But this auditorium became the place where the real dealings went down. Rome's decision-makers gathered right here, including Virgil and Horace. Maecenas built this space to show off his power and influence, but this auditorium became the cultural and political hub of Rome.
The colorful character of the whole building, just expressing the glory of its owner, was part of a political development as well, where you have the rich and famous wanting to express their wealth and their fame.
This is brilliant.
Yeah, it's cracked up, but the stucco itself was painted.
This is really gorgeous.
Brilliant colors as well. Also the blue in there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, look at this.
The motifs are not very clear anymore, but it's almost like looking out of a window with a countryside scenery and what we call a trompe d'oeil, so it's the trick of the eye. It's a 3D effect painted on the wall.
That's really cool. The auditorium created an almost hypnotic effect on the crowd, but beneath the mystical surface were the guts of Roman engineering.
How did they construct this auditorium?
A, with slaves, B, with a lot of material. You have almost a sandwich structure. Outside layers filled in with either rubble or brick, but it gives you a very solid structure. That's why a lot of these walls are still standing up.
When the building was discovered, a small portion of the wall was sticking out above the ground. When they started construction on the road along the piazza, they began to remove the rubble and debris that filled the auditorium. A retaining wall was installed to protect and enclose the delicate frescoes and murals inside. In doing so, they also protected the incredibly significant role this auditorium played in the rise of ancient Rome. After Maecenas died, he left it to Augustus. From then on, it became the private pleasure palace for every emperor for 400 years. This villa was even used by one of Rome's most notorious and ruthless rulers, Emperor Nero.
Nero is said to have been on this spot, on the property, when Rome was ablaze in the year 64 AD and was overlooking the city from the Esquiline Hill from this particular property and enjoying the view of it.
It's maddening to think about that. I mean, this spot here, so much history. Nero was here, and Virgil was here, and Augustus surely was here. This little drop in the middle of, it looks like surrounded by all of modern Rome. You wouldn't even know about this place.
No, it's very hard to discover, but it's one of Rome's little jewels, little secrets. Around the corner, all of a sudden you find something. That's the magic of Rome, I would say. It's a reminder of Rome's glorious past, and only bits and pieces. Can you imagine the whole of it?
It's like a treasure. You see something sticking out of the ground, you start digging down, and then you discover this place.
You really get the Indiana Jones feeling. It's sort of, you're in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's there. You find treasures.
The Romans are credited for being innovators, philosophers, and master craftsmen. From creating the first sewer system to building auditoriums to promote their ideas, the Romans were ahead of their time, allowing them to become one of the greatest empires in history. Today, evidence of the influence of ancient Rome is seen not only in its ruins, but also in every modern city around the world.
Ancient Rome grew from a small town on the banks of the Tiber into a mega metropolis that went unrivaled for over 1,000 years. Its sewers, aqueducts, and high-rises became the blueprint for modern-day cities. Today, much of that master plan is